Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Brad Bond. I'm a technical writer from Fremont, California. I have been turning on and off for about 20 years, but it really became a problem during the pandemic, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks for us all.
Yeah, exactly. Being cooped up inside. So the projects that we're going to do today are two message off-center bowls. Um, the thing that I want to impress upon you is that there is a conspiracy that all of your bowls have to be concentric. All right, and this is just the man trying to keep you down. Okay, we're gonna get past it together today. We're gonna introduce a little bit of wobble, a little bit of vibration, a pinch of danger, but I'm gonna show you some tips to keep everything nice and stable on the lathe as best as possible. So the first method that we're going to show today requires a couple of chucks. Now, you can use whatever chucks you have, but what I recommend doing is taking your chucks, the larger one and the smaller one, and you are going to set some dividers to the interior diameter of your small chuck and the exterior diameter of your large chuck. And the reason for this should become clear fairly shortly. So we're just going to get mounted up. Goggles. We'll say it feels weird to do this without like the full respirator and that whirring in my ear. But
It's hard to hear you when you wear that.
yeah, exactly. So, sorry, one thing that I also wanted to show you. So, a bit of math that you have to do before we actually get stuck in. So, you have to measure the smallest interior diameter of your smaller chuck. You have to measure the largest exterior diameter of your larger chuck. You have to take the difference there. So, this is about 6 inches, about 2 inches. So, I'm left with 4 inches as the difference, right? Any math majors in here, right? Any engineers? And then you divide that by 2, because we're dealing with a radius here, right? No longer the diameter of the chucks. And then I hedge off of that a little bit. So I drilled my center hole, like I'm going to use a woodworm like normal. And then I've drilled a second hole here, 1.5 inches outside of that. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter which direction. That's the beautiful thing about circles, right? As you go outwards. I try to align it with the grain just for the purposes of aesthetics later on. That also gives me the opportunity to carve against the grain if I want to embellish it later. So I figure it's about time to get stuck in. And just because y'all are here, I'm going to use a tailstock today.
Which size do you drill that hole?
That's 3/8. So whatever matches up with your screw chug. So first thing we're gonna do, just get this thing concentric, right? Knock off the edges. I've already done a lot of that work on the bandsaw. One of the biggest things that I think you can learn as you gain experience of the wood turner is to decouple your eyes from your tool. Look at that horizon. You can't tell what the tool is doing when you're looking directly down at the tool. So finding your eyes all the way up to that horizon. I'm going to take my cuts a little bit slower than normal today because I've been advised that we can't do a ton of sanding, so I'm going to try to get it as clean as I can. I come right up to that edge. I'll knock it back a little bit just so that I don't tear out the top.
What's the width species?
This is Sapele. Turning speed for anybody who's super curious, we're going right about 700. So that's a decent service. We can work with that. So now I'm going to flatten off the bottom just a hair. I have to say, using somebody else's lathe is like using a rental car. You're just flailing around, the windshield wipers are going. Don't know where any of the controls are.
Not going.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I'm just going to take a couple of full cuts down here and just to flatten off the bottom a little bit before I remove the tailstock. All right, now we have something that is reasonably well balanced. I find the screw check is pretty secure. I probably trust it a little more than I should sometimes, but don't usually have issues with it. And then what I like to do when I'm done using the tailstock is I like to get this little point out of here, because if you've ever hit your funny bone, putting it on this will change your life in the best way. Not great. Okay, so now we're going to get into kind of the mechanical portion of this turn. There isn't math involved necessarily, but we do have to think through the process a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a recess that will fit the outer diameter of my biggest jaws. And I can't just go ahead and remove all the interior material because we're going to need it later, because within that recess we're going to put a little tenon that we're going to use to grip the bowl. So I have my dividers set. I'm going to just take one last quick little planing cut right here in my center. Beautiful. And then slow it down when you're using your dividers. These aren't fun to throw. Making sure we only touch the left edge. I love when I get that right. It really makes it look like I know what I'm doing. All right, let me pencil this in so that maybe it'll show up a little bit better on camera.
Yep.
How about that? Cool. Okay, so this is not necessarily a smart use of this tool. All right, I suppose I should have led with the disclaimer that not everything that I do here is going to be like the perfect safety case, but it is the method that I have found that works for me. So your shop safety is your own responsibility. Disclaimers, legalese, y'all get the picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little recess in here, and I want to remove just enough material that I can kind of slip this chuck in here. So I need it to be about as wide as this chuck jaw is, or the chuck jaw plus the curved radius plus math.
So that tool is just a parting tool?
Just a simple thin curved parting tool, 1/16 Robert Sorby, $45.99 on Amazon. Let's get a little bit of speed here. Pop our subs down. And I'm cutting to the inside of this line. I'm going to leave the line a little bit, because if I overshoot this, I can't grip it, right? And I don't really have a backup plane today, so we're just going to try to get this right. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper than you normally might for a bowl. And this is for two reasons. One, I need some clearance because I need the tenon that I carve out of this to have just enough meat that I can really seat it in a truck. And the second reason is, does anybody have trouble with their tenons coming apart when they turn bowls occasionally? It's important to go deeper than your foot. So I diagram this up here. You want your recess to go slightly deeper than your foot, right? If you make these level, the entire weight of the bowl is supported just on the foot, right? But if you go deeper, now we have the entire wall of the bowl supporting whatever you're doing with the rest of the bowl. So it doesn't have to be a lot, right? I think that especially new turners, they think that the strength of their foot comes from how deep they can make that recess. It's really about the width more than anything else. And so the width of the support actually makes a big difference as well. So if you make this a little bit deeper than your foot, you have the whole outside of the bowl, the biggest chuck you can use, the more secure the hole is going to be. And we're going to take one more part here. I'm going to do a quick sanity check with the chuck. So I want to leave as much of that material in the center as I can. Not quite. Got a little more. Okay. And I recommend slowly walking this in. If you made a lot of these, I think what a really smart person might do would be to make a steel scraper that is exactly the width of those chuck jaws, right? Figure out what that exact width is. I would grind something to it, to that width, and then you could basically just do one plunge and call it a day. I'm clearly not that bright. I'm going to try to get this bottom surface as flat as I can. Again, under normal circumstances, I would probably sand this. One thing to note if you're going to do this, especially your first couple of times, anytime you think about it, just go ahead and sand your piece. Because once we start moving things off center, you won't have an opportunity to sand the outside concentrically. If you move it back to being centered, you won't have an opportunity to sand that interior bowl concentrically. So if you like sanding under power, which I think most of us do, because hand sanding is the worst, just go ahead and sand at every stage. Every time that you remember it, every time you're about to move to a new phase of the project, I think it's worthwhile to just go ahead and sand the piece. So let's see, this should be just like good to go now. There we go, beautiful. So,
Brad,
yes,
one question.
yes.
Most of us, I don't know if any of us, or all of us, whatever, but I've been taught that you never use your jaws with the jaws wide open because it only has minimal pointage of foot holding. Isn't that a little dangerous?
Yeah, I would say again, this is not like a perfect safety case. If it really makes you that nervous, you can go ahead and use the interior as a tenon, like I'm probably going to do today. So instead of gripping to the outside, you can grip back to the inside.
Or if you had 20-inch jaws, but you didn't have to open them that far. If you want that far, and we don't want to have so much jaws running around.
There you go.
So now that I know that that chuck is going to work, what I'm going to do is kind of finish up the outside of the bowls here, because this is going to be my last chance to do it while it's all concentric.
So is that, are you, is it a recess or a tenon grab on the?
Honestly, it can be either.
Okay.
I'm probably going to grip it as a tenon because I'm in front of other folks today, and that's a more secure hold for me. I prefer to do the recess method because then I can leave a little bit more of the material on the inside. It just kind of depends on which way you want to shade for your tolerances.
Do either way is what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
You're safe either way.
I drew my spot well.
Right.
Unless it bounces off somebody there.
So when I taught this a little while back, I saw somebody come back later and they had turned sort of this meaty tenon on the inside and then cut a mortise on the inside of this one, and it worked fine for them. So I would say just mind your turning speeds more than anything else. All right, so let's pretend like this is actually going to be a bowl, huh? Now again, I don't want to go as deep as that tenon, but two important cuts here. Number one, I'm going to shave a little bit off of this. Here, let me raise my still stuck here a little bit. I'm going to shave a bit. Boy, this doesn't come okay. The reason being, if this bowl moves at all, I don't want this tenon to be the thing that actually sits on the table, right? So you can see right here, I have the tenon just rebaited a little bit from the outside of the foot, right? So that's the cut that I'm going to take right now. Just a little bit, doesn't have to be a ton. And then one other thing that I like to do is I like to slope my foot inwards just a little bit, just back towards the center, just a hair, just to make sure that I'm getting the widest possible point of contact with my foot. So, not a ton here, just the whisper there. And then, because we're not crazy about plain feet, I like to kind of bead in mine. And then, so you can see we have a pretty wide foot here, which does limit our design possibilities just a little bit. I'm gonna push the outside up in a slight curve, but I'm not gonna do too much on the exterior here.
So just this a little bit, just so that it sits a little bit higher on the table.
That way it adds just a bit of drama. Okay. It's a reason for just with them sanding it, they'll just have to go with this thing. Alright. So now we're gonna switch over to phase 2, which is get the big chuck and get it on the lathe. So I call this the Chuck Remover 2000, patent pending.
I get told channel lock.
What they don't know won't learn. So nice and tight. It's a big tenon, so I wouldn't worry too hard about over tightening there. And I'm just gonna take a facing cut here because this is gonna be my last opportunity to get this surface nice and flat, right? Because all the rest of the turning we're gonna do is gonna be eccentric. So again, sand. When you're changing processes in this build, go ahead and sand. So I'm gonna take quick facing cut. So ideally, this will wind up being flat enough that you can't see light when you put your ruler down on it. I think that's close enough for what we're trying to do today. Beautiful. So here again, what should we be doing? Sanding. Exactly. That's always going to be the answer. If I ask you what my name is later on and you say sanding, I'll not be disappointed. So now time to switch chucks. And we're gonna go right back to the woodworm. So any like engineers or mathematicians or anything in here?
Oh, yeah.
No? Okay, well I guess I'm gonna have to do the math for you. There are 2 holes in here. Oh, there we go. How many holes do you see here? And would you say that's
Do a C in my full division?
would you say that's more or less than 1? So that's really the key piece here.
You gotta watch him, he's our basically,
Oh, no kidding. All right.
on satellite, I can talk to him.
Well, we're gonna do our best not to send anything into orbit today.
Good, that'd be impressive.
Collectively, thank you.
I gotcha.
Yes, that's
It's my one beef with mathematicians. They think that 1 + 1 = 2, and it's the biggest mistake.
They always forget that plus or minus and what's the thermal and
What problem?
alright, so this is where things start to get exciting. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to remove the tailstock so I have a bit more room to work back here.
The mustard monster jumped right on top.
You can get Wells to show you how to do that.
He's not here. Back enough, that's fine. Okay, so
You turn the speed way down.
you got it. There we go. Okay, so we have a nice view on this camera. That's great. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna cut a tenon for my small chucks out of the meat that's left from the recess from the last one. So I'm trying to take. So here's my center. Sorry, let me try to show this for everybody on the camera. How's that look? Cool.
Center standing still.
It's so hard to see.
Boy, isn't it?
A little bit more. Okay. There we go. And if I did my math correct, oh, we're gonna get a bowl today. That's great. So if I mismeasure any part of that and this circle doesn't fall in this meat, game over. You just turn a regular bowl from there, you flip it back around and finish up. So I get to finish up, so I'm gonna take my cut on the outside here to try to leave this tender. So
More or less.
I was hoping to get another 100 RPM out of that, but I think that's probably plenty. So just using the parting tool, take your time, you know. There's absolutely no rush here.
This is why it's not the best thing to do.
Sorry, give me that one more time.
We used to have a much smaller lathe,
Yeah.
but we recently bought a bigger one especially for you.
Well, I appreciate it.
Not broken in here.
That it does.
So for aesthetics, I am going to want to get this cut down to the depth of the rest of the recess in here, just so that that's all kind of one flat plane surface. It's a difficult thing to get exactly right, but I think it's worth the time to at least try. Sanity checks. I get really paranoid at this stage of it every single time. I want to make sure that I have enough to actually make the bowl. How's the camera over the shoulder? Just a hair more.
You're making the same depth on both of them?
Exactly. Right. So pretty close to the same depth here, and we finally sort of broken through the outside. So this is where you kind of get this this sun and moon shape. Anybody here use skateboard? Fair enough. There was this shoe brand called Osiris, and this was their logo, and I always wanted them. And I came from a Payless family, you know. I never got them, but I get to make these now.
Payless is gone now too.
I know, it's sad. Who would have thought that $19 shoes would go out of style? Alright, so that's probably gonna take a little.
If you want to make enough money to buy the shoes you wanted, then wood turning may not be the correct.
You all know the adage about wood turning, right? Like, how do you make a large fortune in wood turning?
You don't do it.
Yes,
Exactly. How do you make a small fortune in wood turning? Start with a large one. All right, so I'm gonna do a quick sanity check with my chuck here just to make sure that I have this dimension correct. We're about level on the bottom. Since we're not sanding, I'm not gonna worry too hard about the finish. There we go. Yep, and just enough to grip. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking, boy, that's an awfully small tenon for that bowl. Yes.
But it makes.
But only by a hair. More efficient.
I had fun doing it.
Yeah, this is one of those things that doesn't strictly follow the safety procedures, but if you're willing to sort of take pains, turn slow, do it with sharp tools and stuff like that, you can get away with it. I think that's the best way to put how this bowl works is you often get away with it if you follow the rules.
And papers.
Yeah, right.
You got enough for today.
Only one notes though. The bottom one's already a piece of smart.
Yeah.
How deep is the recess?
About a quarter of an inch. Doesn't have to be super deep. One thing that I should mention is this is not worth doing on punky mystery wood, you know, the stuff that's just been kind of hanging around. You want kiln dried, solid timber. If you can dent the wood with your fingernail or honestly with a tool, you probably don't want to do it. You want something that's hard, that has a little bit of meat to it. So I'm just checking to make sure that I'm sitting flat here. And I am going to get a pretty decent grip on this guy because we're going to do something that's not terribly smart, but is a lot of fun.
Where are the jokes?
There you go.
Well, you wouldn't put the hills in here.
No, because we're going to start hollowing pretty much immediately. So I need that extra little bit of room. I don't have to go super deep here. You can see on the other piece over there, it's not a huge bowl. Obviously, you're limited by the exterior edge, right? Oh shoot, the one thing I wanted to do on the other, that's all right, we'll be fine. I did want to cut a bead on the outside here. I find that the bead highlights the difference in size between the two bowls. I find that if you just do, you know, a flat platter and then the bowl on the interior, it can get a little, like the scale can get a little bit lost. So I find that the beads really help draw that together. I have another example that I did when I was practicing this demo earlier this week where I got the beads on the outside and the inside to line up, which was a really nice little bit of luck. It's a cool effect. If you can figure out a way to make that happen consistently, I say go for it because I think it's really neat. All right, so now we make a bowl. And again, take your time. You're not going to be able to speed your way through this. Worth remembering that if you're doing it in side grain, it is always easier to go this way than it is to go straight across. I see a lot of new turners, especially, who are taking the same profile cuts every single time, and you're cutting straight across end grain the entire time you're trying to move across the bottom of the bowl, right? You're going end grain, side grain, end grain, side grain. That's what starts to introduce that vibration at the bottom of the bowl, right? So if you're cutting back, basically back towards the headstock, you're only ever cutting through face grain. So that makes a much nicer cut. So when I'm hogging out materials, it's just going to cut straight back.
What's your speed?
Looks like a shade under 400. On my lathe at home, yeah, you can see. So we're off center here. I have to get underneath both of these screw holes though. So the reason that I don't use a screw chuck for this is A, pretty difficult to center around that second point, and B, if you wind up with all those screw holes, then you got to turn a really wide flat bowl to get underneath all the screw holes, right? It kind of limits your design possibilities there. So I found this to be kind of like the least invasive way of doing this, if that makes sense. Also with doing, when you use your screw for your screw chuck, like experiment a little bit at home, see what is the minimum depth that you can get away with drilling the hole, because over drilling it means the bowl has to go deeper, right? So that limits your design possibilities as well. So, and then I just take my 3/8 drill bits over to the grinder and I grind a little stop mark on there. So, you know, it doesn't come off like a Sharpie, it doesn't get caught up in stuff like that blue tape, right? That way, that drill bit is for that purpose. It only takes me to that exact depth that I need to make full use of the wood.
Which is how deep? Is it 1.5?
I think I'm getting away with like a shade under 3/4 right now. It's not a ton, but making sure that it sits flat against the chuck, that's actually where the stability in that system comes from. Sorry, did I have another one over here?
Do you ever use a glued-on fanning where you glue with the wood on It's very offset.
I've seen it done. I was lucky that I came up in the time of the scroll chuck, so I never really experimented with the glue blocks. I've saved bowls with hot glue before, hot gluing it to some other piece, but never as a primary method of making, I would say. I'm not against it in principle. I just bought a chuck with my first lathe, and that's just kind of how I did it, I did learn how to drive a manual, but I was like 2 years away from missing that too. So it's, it's just kind of like where you were in the time frame. Okay, so we're about 328, 350, we start to introduce some wobbles. So if I lean up against it,
It's heavier than you.
yeah, not enough late pizza, I guess. All right. All I'm going to do is get under the holes now.
Do you want that tailstock out of the way?
I think we'll be okay for another second. It won't matter as much with the other bowl. I'm also trying to only use this gouge so I have a sharp one when I go back to the next one.
When you're following out, do you have to reduce the speed because you're taking more center of mass out the middle, then that eccentric center of mass is becoming more prominent, isn't it?
It's true. I found that it tends to balance itself out. I haven't noticed that the vibration creeps up that much. Yeah, I would say if anything, I tend to increase the speed slightly, but maybe that's just me getting braver as I get more comfortable with that particular piece. But yeah, I haven't noticed that that the vibration makes that much of a difference. I think the eccentric mass compared to the overall mass of the lathe stays within like a pretty static window. Like it doesn't change all that much, so I don't notice it personally. If you have a really light lathe, kind of like I don't know, my old lathe was like a spindly grizzly. It was up high, but like, it was basically on sawhorses. Lots of vibration, you might notice it on something like that. But this thing has to weigh a couple 100 pounds, right?
And the weight of the wood compared to the weight of your chuck.
Yeah.
We'll also say that if your hands get sore easily, it's okay to take breaks. This kind of beats you up a little bit with all the vibration. See, as I turn that corner, you hear that difference? Ingrained face green, ingrained face. Let's make sure we got under those holes. There we go. Okay, so no trace of the holes left. I'm gonna take one, finishing cut on kind of a dull gouge here, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So. That last cut on the bottom, take your time. I like to move my hand to overhand when I start to make that transition on the bottom, just because that end grain is going to start introducing vibration. And far back on the gouge for leverage. You drive the tool, don't let it drive you. And then that cut really slows down as we get towards that center. Because the absolute speed of that wood at the center is 0, so we need to slow down the feed rate of that cut. And still got a splinter. that'll have to do.
It's a feature.
Yeah, actually, not much chip out there. I think that's pretty decent.
So that gouge you got there has a very flat grind on it, right? You stay like yourself.
Reasonably. I haven't backed the heel off in a while. It's sort of there. There is a secondary bevel. I should probably cut this back a little bit, but it does fine for our purposes here. Okay, so I do want to add one last little detail here just to sort of highlight this. So I'm gonna cut a bead on the outside here. Now this isn't perfectly concentric, so we're gonna have to go a little bit deeper than I might ideally like to, but I think that this bead on this bowl does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of highlighting proximity to the edge. So what you're seeing now is the problem with me not getting this face perfectly flat earlier. So now I'm sort of bumping on one side and not on the other. Yeah, not exactly concentric there, huh?
It's just a moonbeam.
Yeah, moon bead.
That's what sanding's for.
Yeah, this is where I would take my favorite wood turning tool, which is the 120 grit gouge. Just kind of rub that in right there. And let me take one more pass at it. That's really beating, yeah. A little more steel behind it. Well, it looks a little bit more like a bead.
Where do you get your blanks from?
This I got from a cabinet maker. He had this stuff. It was like nearly 3 inches thick in 13-inch wide slabs, 10 feet long. So I literally just filled up my truck bed, handed him all the cash in my wallet, and I've been turning this stuff for the better part of a year now. So technically, this is a complete project now. This is an off-center bowl carved in a whole blank. What I do think this opens up possibilities for is ornamentation, right? Doing stuff off the lathe, getting to work with your hands again. I think that it forms a nice big flat surface that is perfect for stuff like pyrography, right? I have a couple examples back here. Let's see, which one's that right? So I just did a little bit of hand carving with a V tool on this one, just to give it a little bit of texture. I'll go ahead and pass this around.
To the camera.
Yeah, there we go. So I can catch that.
You're gonna zoom in.
Perfect. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, just a little bit of texture there. And the inspiration for this actually came from a watch that I saw where every other link on the bracelet was either brushed or highly polished. And so they played with the light differently. So sort of as you turn it over, and so you wind up with, you know, polished surfaces, beads, which reflect light a little bit differently. And then this big platter, and I thought it was a bit dull if the platter had the same texture as the interior bowl. So I literally just took like a tiny little like 1/4-inch V gouge and just did some hand carving in here. And I think it really adds to the piece, but I'll go ahead and pass this around. Also, if you're a lunatic and you have a rose engine,
Oh, my God.
you can start to have a little bit of fun. Really just seeing the piece as a canvas, right? And I think we can all tell here, just to sort of head this off, this isn't a salad bowl, right? This is not necessarily a functional piece, but I do think that it makes a great canvas. And so I encourage you, if you try this method, carve it up. Like try something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable on it, right? It's just wood. We're all hurtling towards our own mortality someday. Like do the cool stuff. Get it in, you know? Yes, please.
What's a rose engine?
So a rose engine is a complex turning device that uses basically cams. So I would mount this in a chuck on the headstock. I have a high-speed cutter over here. and I have cams that bump the headstock back and forth
Wow.
rhythmically. So either in a a sine wave or a Tudor rose or whatever, you could basically print your own shapes and stuff like that. And then the cutter speeds very quickly, so the cutter is static, so the bowl bumps back and forth into it. And so I'm just controlling the depth of cut, where the cutter is positioned. I'm also phasing it in between the rows, so you can tell I'm going sort of half a pattern, so that leaves this sort of almost dragon scale look.
So did you modify your lathe?
Did you make your own engine?
Completely separate device. I bought a carcass from a guy who quit on the project. He was out in Missouri, and then I made fairly significant modifications. I'll be adding some automation to it later this year so that I can sync the spindle to the cutter, so I can cut spirals and stuff like that while it's bumping. Subject for another demo, probably. Subject for really how to lose like 30 to 40 years trying to figure out the math behind how those patterns show up. But yeah, this is technically a completed version of this bowl. When I see this, I just see something that's absolutely ripe for carving, pyrography, like other surface treatments. I mean, painting in that space, I can see like a horizon with the moon or something like that, a little town that goes around the outside of the bowl. Like, be creative. I think that's the big thing here, is like, see this as a canvas, as a starting point, right? You've done the dangerous thing, now you get to work with your hands off the lathe. I think it's worthwhile. So now we're gonna work on the second method. And the reason that the second method exists is because this method limits us to chuck sizes, right? So if I have a piece that is smaller than this foot, can't really do this method, right? I could use a smaller chuck, but then that really slims down my margins in here. I end up with like a kind of a short, flat, frankly kind of dumpy looking piece, which is not what I want. So we're gonna try something a little bit different, just as dumb, don't you worry. But it gives us a very dramatic look out of a piece of wood that is tall compared to how wide it is, if that makes sense. So I have this piece of walnut, I'd say, I don't know, 6.5, 7 inches maybe, and then probably 3 and change inches deep. So kind of a stocky blank, and that's what I recommend starting with here. Yeah. So the whole idea on this one is that we're going to turn a long tenon, and then we're going to grip the tenon weird. We're literally just going to kick it off axis, and that's going to give us the ability to move the center of that bowl off from the center of the piece. So let's start here.
Could you do this using a mortise instead of a tenon for the bottom?
You could, yeah.
And you could do 2 mortises?
You could. The only thing that I would be concerned about would be how close you get to this edge, right? Because right here, I'm lacking support on this side, right?
Oh, I see.
So I would be pretty afraid of blowing this out. Suppose you had like an 8-inch jaw and a 2-inch jaw. I think you could probably pull it off. In general, I tend to trust a tenon more than a recess. Just generally, that's just my vibe. I don't have any science to back that up, so please. Speed. Feels so good to have it again.
All of this could be done
Okay, so some quick design notes. For the outside of this bowl, I like to keep it give or take hemispherical. And that's because when we push it off axis a little bit, we want to make sure that we have a continuous surface, right? If I do an OG curve of some kind, some kind of, swoopy S-shaped curve, when I go to do the bottom, I'm going to cut across a portion of that, so it's not going to survive. So with the hemisphere, kind of no matter what, I get a flat surface and a shape that makes sense on the outside. So that's what I'm going to do here. This will make more sense in like 6 minutes, I promise.
So cool.
So I call this method the long tenon method because we're going to cut the tenon a little bit longer than is theoretically necessary. Part of the reason that I like a nice thick blank for this method is because it gives us a little bit of extra room for the tenon. If you do this on like a 1.5 inch thick board, you're going to run out of space pretty quickly. So I like to keep this a little bit longer. I forgot my spear scraper, so we're going to do kind of a dicey touch over here.
Just to get nice and flat here.
Now, normally I would recommend dovetailing your tenon to match your jaws. Here, I think straight sides are nice because when we go to grip this off center, if we dovetail it back in, we won't be able to get a chuck jaw into the base of the bowl again, basically. So let's do a little actual bowl turning here.
How deep is that tenon?
Say about 1/4, maybe shading towards 3/8, but yeah, about 1/4 of an inch. I would typically keep this pretty slim if I were just turning the bowl or, rough turning or what have you, but I think that'll be enough. Now, why pull cuts on the outside? Because the finish doesn't matter because it's not the last cut. I think that it makes sense when you're starting out to practice your push cuts as often as you can, really get that muscle memory down, but they are a lot slower than just bulk material removal cuts. A lot slower. Nice surface though. Little chatoyancy right there. Yeah. So that's the benefit of the push cut. It's nice finish. Again, much slower.
Less sanding.
Exactly. Yeah, almost no torn grain if you're hitting it properly. Right, so what I like to do when I'm taking my final push cut is I like to figure out where I'd like to end the cut, position my feet there, and I'd rather start off balance than you ever start one of those cuts and then you find that you're kind of trying to ride it off into the distance like a 3-legged horse. It's not great. So I like to plant, be stable where I'd like to wind up. Cut back around. Swing with that arm first. Bring it into my hip. Now swing with it like a dance partner. There we go. And I'm nice and stable where I finish my cut. So I'm not, trying to throw the gouge out there way over my left foot. Now I don't think that I've gotten this shape exactly right. So I'm going to take one more here.
If you've ever wondered about front hand, backhand balance, drive with the best. Basically, I just use the left to dampen the vibrations as I start getting up here where I'm cutting across a lot more end range. Just the finest shaving on the top there. Roll the gouge over. There we go.
You could probably clean that up with a little bit of 180, right? Like we're in a decent shape, you know. No real torn grain through here. Maybe like a touch of pluck out, but doing okay. Okie doke. So now I'm gonna switch sizes on these chucks. There's my tenon. So in my shop at home, I have everything on magnets behind me. You know, 3 rows of magnets and French plates and stuff like that. So I keep turning around, and yeah, there it is.
Good.
All your tools stick to your tool bag, right? People with
You know, people said that like it was gonna make it harder to move and stuff like that. I've never noticed it. I will say, like, coming here not having done that, this should be flowing freely, right? It's like I shouldn't have even magnetized this by slowly over time dragging magnets across it, but I don't notice the difference. Maybe that just means I got a knockoff Laguna. Maybe it's not actually like a ferrous metal on the tool rest. There we go. So quick facing cut, and then again I would sand because this is my last chance to sand this face under power. So for this one, the flat face doesn't matter as much. I'd say just go ahead and sand it back to your desired level. But now we get to do the dumb stuff. So what I'm gonna do here, can we get side on camera really quickly? Do you mind if we get
Wait, no, not an option.
not an option? Okay, cool. So
Limited video.
I'm gonna exaggerate this. So I'm just loosening the chuck a little bit, and I'm pulling the tenon off center, and that's it. You didn't need me to come here for that secret, did you? That's kind of the entire game.
I did that by accident.
That's kind of how this came about, was playing with that eccentricity a little bit.
Can I just peek and see?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Oh, just a little.
It's not a ton.
Oh.
So the wider the piece is,
No, can we get the camera there? It's
Yeah, sure.
a very small amount of.
you can make the tenon a little bit longer. What the difference you have to split is that you can't
No, I'm running
have
out of cord.
a portion of the chuck or a portion of the tenon bottoming out in the chuck. So it has to be thin enough that even when you kick it off axis, you don't have anything bottoming out in the chuck.
Did you ever slide any kind of shimming between the flattening of board?
You know, I've thought for a while about maybe 3D printing some so I could get a repeatable angle. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I'm not sure how much support it offers on the bottom because the support comes from the contact of the jaws on the outside, and we're missing 3/4 of that anyway, right?
Then. So it,
Let me come around.
Yeah.
Circle something.
tiny amount.
Yeah, it's not a ton.
I'm feeling a little bit safer.
We're still gonna keep our speeds
Just don't have,
reasonable.
just don't catch.
If you don't take it over, it's gonna have to bend head start. The strength put onto that one.
So as you can tell, a lot more stable than the last bowl. So I'm still not gonna push the speed too high, but I actually get to turn here. Again, the only technical requirement for the inside of this bowl is just getting underneath that woodwork through.
How fast were you going?
About 6:30. So you can see we're a little bit off center here, right? Not a ton. We're not pushing the horizontal axis as much. Where this is going to get interesting is I'm going to make this a little bit wider. One thing I will also recommend is having a bit more steel when you're turning these bowls is nicer. So if you have like a half inch, 5/8, 3/4 bowl gouge, having that extra steel seems to dampen the vibration a little bit. I know some people who go as far as like filling their handles with lead shot just to add extra mass sort of behind the tool. I try not to touch lead. If you, I don't know, you happen upon some like tungsten or something like that, it's probably worthwhile.
Latex.
What's that?
Latex.
That's immediately easier on the hand.
So that's our bowl. You guys know about bowls, right? Okay. So this is where we get to have some fun. So because this is off center, you can tell that the face projects out a little bit more on one side than the other. We're going to take advantage of this by cutting that part and only that part. So we're not going to go all the way around the bowl. We're just going to sort of add a facet to the outside. For safety purposes, we're going to cut back towards the headstock. We want all of that pressure going back in here, especially since we don't have complete contact here. We're just gripping a little tenon. I think cutting that way probably puts it into that camera right there. So we're going to cut back towards the headstock. That is the main safety rule for this portion here. Again, dumb stuff, but like moderately dumb stuff.
You could just swap them over.
So pick an angle. Aesthetically, I think that this is just kind of a trial and error situation. What I like to do is sort of look at the ghost wood and find the angle that is naturally formed on the bowl between where the farthest back piece of the edge is and where the farthest forward piece of the edge is. So I can see right now that that's about the angle that we have, and I'm just going to go ahead and mirror that. Get a little bit more speed here so let's see it. I also got reading glasses last week. It's starting. And I didn't bring them.
That's a game changer.
Oh yeah.
Worse.
We're putting in a lot of air here. Eating a lot of walnut. And so let's just take a quick look. There we go. So we're sort of adding a facet to the outside here. So I'm going to get a little bit more aggressive. I'm going to start from a bit farther back because I think this is what's going to highlight how off center the bowl is, right? So I want to come right up to the edge of this bowl so that there is more of this face, and that's going to really show off the fact that this bowl is not perfectly centered. And these cuts are fun because they start rough and then they give you a little bit of hope in the middle because you're turning wood the whole way around, and then they finish even worse than they started. Okay, getting pretty close there. So you can see this is starting to highlight that difference, right? I might just go a little bit tighter here. There's the hope. And there it goes. Sorry, I'm eating a lot of walnut up here. I didn't finish that cut.
Okay, it's not protein.
Yeah, right. Keto friendly, right?
Because you didn't bring your glass.
Okay, so that's about as close as I think I'm willing to go. For real, I'm eating a ton of walnut. So if you wanted to get a little bit more clever about this, while you have it in this flat configuration, like before you kick it off center, I think if you put a little bit of a bead right around that rim, then you wind up with flat bead, which reflects a little bit differently, and then the big flat, which reflects the light a little bit differently. So I think that highlights things even a little bit more. So now we get to have a little bit more off-center fun. That's not as dangerous. I'm sorry, guys. But we get to decide how the bottom looks. And we actually get a fair amount of freedom here. Because what I'm going to use is a friction block. I'm just using one of the attachments for a vacuum chuck. There are a lot of ways that you can do this. I've seen a lot of people who will stick a plunger on a piece of wood because the rubber is really grippy, but it's a little bit soft, so it actually forms like a nice contact interface. I've seen people who take their chuck, stretch a plunger over the top of it, over the top of their 4-inch jaws, and that forms a nice contact block because then you're not putting the wood directly on the steel.
Rule of thumb, not a used one.
There you go. Unless, of course, your company is called Norovirus Workshop, in which case.
Some of us are rich like you, Larry. Can't just buy plungers willy-nilly.
Sorry, I'm having a freak out on my word. I put my lesson. There it is. Okay. You ever do that? Walk into a room, put something down, and you turn around, and it's like you dropped it into a black hole.
Yep.
Like, what even happened to it?
Do I ever know?
That's what ADD is.
That's what they tell me.
Wait until you can't find your reading glasses.
They're on your face.
And they're on my feet. Yeah. Holding the phone, talking to somebody. I should get my phone. All right. So this tenon is the limitation for where we get to put the tailstock. But we also get to make some design decisions about how we want to kick this off axis. So I like to take the broadest part of my face, and I like to have that sort of facing like sunny side up. I like to have that be the part that's kind of greeting the user of the bowl. So I'm going to push that side towards the headstock a little bit and make sure that I just catch the very edge here of this tenon. Okay, maybe a little bit more of an edge because I have an audience here. I don't want to throw this thing. And nice and tight in here. Let's lock this. So now we're having some fun, but we are supported and we're protected by, well, I'm protected by the florist. I don't know what the rest of y'all are doing.
Well, if it went off, it would bounce down and back out to you anyways.
What I'm hoping is that we get a deflection towards the floor over here.
Let's just leave it where it is and not have it bounce anywhere.
You know, that's definitely my first instinct here.
They're right there.
Thanks for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need a second person. So we're gonna slow it down, sanity check our speed here a little bit. I'm just trying to remove the tenon here, but I'm also trying to establish a base. And so the reason that I wanted that sort of gradual curve on the bottom is, again, if I do an OG and I just cut it flat across it, it's gonna look ridiculous. I'm gonna have pieces where I've kind of cut across the curve, kind of not cut across the curve. This also doesn't work well on shallow pieces because you're gonna leave a portion of the foot, right? If the bowl has any depth, right? So you have, you know, your bowl that has some depth to it, and then you try to cut across it, you're gonna make the worst elliptical funnel you've ever seen. It just doesn't quite work. So a little bit more beef on the piece really helps you out. It gives you some margins. Alrighty. So I can see in the ghost wood, maybe you can see it here too. I can see where the eccentric part of the tenon is, so that's going to be the width of this foot, basically.
Don't worry, if you touch the screen, it won't hit you in the hand.
That's why I went over there. Right. Again, cutting back towards the headstock as much as possible. Let's see if I'm not far enough. Yeah, looks like we're gonna just clear it. Cool. So this is where things get a little bit tight. 60-degree cone center works a little bit better here because it gives you a little bit more room. So at this point, having an actual vacuum cut, pretty nice. I would just turn this on, finish the bottom free. We're gonna take some liberties here. Don't look at the bottom of this one. It's not gonna sand out properly. Yes, sir.
Rap, when he does his bottoms like that, instead of having to cut the thing off, he'll use his drone tool and just put dots all around the bottom. So the whole bottom inside of like that was all carved out. And you can't tell anything.
There you go. Disguising is just as good as fixing sometimes, right?
Yep.
That's what my contractor says. That's what the guy who built my house says. Just put it in the wall. Don't ground it. It's fine.
It's not actually.
Alright, I think that's about as much of that game of chicken I like. So, we can pop it off. Thank goodness. So now we have this bowl that kind of greets you when you come up to it. Kind of tilts up and looks at you a little bit, right? Thank you. So that is the demo. Couple quick design notes here. The thicker you get this piece in proportion to how wide it is, I recommend lengthening the tenon because you really have to push it off axis, otherwise it just kind of looks like a weird egg when you finish, right? If it's a wider piece that's not quite as thick, be very, very careful about the depth of your bowl. It might even be helpful to sort of take the edge of your blank and kind of like just visualize, like where does that bowl have to sit in order for me to cut off the entire bottom of it and have it still be a bowl and not a funnel. Don't be afraid to take your time with this kind of stuff. I know a lot of us are pressed for time in the shop. Biggest lesson I've learned in the last couple of years is it is okay if it takes 3 days. You don't have to finish it on the lathe today, especially if it's dry timber. It's fine. It's going to be there tomorrow. If you're getting tired, Don't rush it to the end. I always regret it when I rush a project at the very end. Don't sand quite as much as I should. Maybe that tear out won't show or whatever. Take a couple days on it. It's fine. You remember the great pieces. You don't remember the ones that you wish you would have finished a little bit better. So that's my spiel. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.